In the summer of 1887, a federal land surveyor named Elias Cord Fenwick was lowered by rope into a side canyon off the Kaibab Plateau in northern Arizona, a narrow slot formation that appears on none of the territorial maps of the period, and that Fenwick had located through a hand-drawn sketch given to him by a Paiute elder who refused to accompany him past the canyon's rim. Fenwick descended 40 feet before he stopped. He was not stopped by the rope. He was stopped by what he saw on the walls. He remained suspended there for what he later recorded as approximately 20 minutes without moving. When he was pulled back up, the two assistants who had lowered him noted that his field notebook was open and that he had written nothing in it. He sat at the rim for an hour. Then he wrote 4 lines. The first line was a measurement, 19 inches. The second was a geometric description, parallel, curved, consistent depth, consistent spacing. The third line was a comparison, identical in profile to the saw-cut face of a Douglas fir stump, Clatsop County, Oregon, 1881. The fourth line was a question he did not answer. What holds a blade 30 feet wide against vertical stone? Fenwick's survey report for that section of the Kaibab Plateau was filed with the General Land Office in Washington in October 1887. The section describing the Slot Canyon, which Fenwick had labeled in his submission index as Appendix C Anomalous Formation, Canyon of Unknown Designation, Section 14, Township 38 North, was not included in the version of the report that entered the official record. The gap in the pagination is visible in the archived copy. The report jumps from page 31 to page 36, with no acknowledgement of the missing pages in any accompanying correspondence. His field notebook, which he had kept continuously since 1879, and which contained records from surveys in 5 territories, including the original notes from the Kaibab descent, disappeared from his home in Salt Lake City in the winter of 1888, along with a leather map case and a wooden box of photographic glass plates he had taken on the descent. Fenwick reported the disappearance to the local marshal. No investigation was opened. The marshal's log for the relevant period shows no entry corresponding to Fenwick's report. Fenwick never returned to the Kaibab Plateau. He left federal surveying in 1889 and spent the remaining 23 years of his life working as a private property assessor in the Salt Lake Valley. He died in 1912. He is not mentioned in any history of southwestern surveying. The official explanation for the marks visible on the walls of multiple canyon formations in the American Southwest is one of 3 things, depending on which institution you ask. The United States Geological Survey will tell you the marks are the result of natural differential erosion, harder and softer layers of stone wearing at different rates over millions of years to produce repeating surface patterns. The National Park Service will tell you, in the language of its interpretive signage, that the marks are evidence of ancient water flow and sediment abrasion. And a small number of academic geologists, when pressed directly on specific formations, will use a third term, fluvial scour, the scouring action of fast-moving water carrying abrasive sediment at high pressure. Each of these explanations has a domain in which it is accurate. Differential erosion is real. Fluvial scour is real. Water does carve stone. What none of these explanations accounts for is marks that are parallel, marks that are evenly spaced, marks that maintain consistent depth across surfaces of varying hardness, marks that appear only on specific vertical planes and not on adjacent surfaces exposed to identical weathering conditions, and marks that, when measured, and a small number of researchers have measured them, produce a repeating interval that is not a product of any natural process that geology has been able to document. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as compelling as I do, Hit subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. The algorithm consistently buries this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. Now, the tool marks, and the trees, and what connects them. To understand what the canyon walls are showing us, we have to go back to something that most people over the age of 50 remember hearing about as children, and that the official scientific establishment has worked steadily to minimize ever since. The Great Forest. Not a forest. The Great Forest. The one documented in pre-1880 photographs taken across the American West, in early explorer accounts from the 1820s and 1830s, and in a body of indigenous oral history that spans at least 14 distinct nations from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Basin. These accounts describe, consistently and in specific terms, trees of a scale that the contemporary American landscape does not contain. Not large trees, not old-growth trees in the way that term is used today. Trees of a fundamentally different order of magnitude, described variously as having trunk diameters of 60 to 150 feet. Canopies that could shade an acre, and root systems that early settlers occasionally mistook for cave entrances. The official scientific response to this body of evidence has been, for more than a century, to categorize it as metaphor, exaggeration, or myth. But there is a photographic record. There are stumps, and there are the canyons. The photographic record is worth dwelling on for a moment, because it is more extensive than most people realize, and it sits, largely uncontested, in federal and state archives that are publicly accessible. The photographs taken by federal timber survey teams between 1870 and 1900, teams operating under the General Land Office, and, after 1881, the Division of Forestry, document stump sites across Oregon, Washington, California, and Idaho, in which the remaining stumps are of a scale that no commercial harvesting operation of the period could plausibly have produced or processed. A Douglas fir stump with a diameter of 60 feet contains a volume of wood that would fill several standard railroad flat cars, and would have required cutting equipment and handling machinery that does not appear in any equipment manifest, any contractor record, or any timber company ledger from the period. These stumps are in the photographic record. The cutting operations that produce them are not, and in many cases, the photographs themselves were filed internally within the General Land Office, and were never included in the published survey reports that became the official documentation of the Western Timber Inventory. A retired mining geologist named Clarence Abner Whitfield spent 19 years between 1958 and 1977 documenting canyon wall formations in Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and the eastern Sierra Nevada range. Whitfield had spent the first part of his career working for copper mining operations in the Southwest, and he had practical, hands-on experience with the marks that industrial cutting equipment leaves on stone. He knew what a drill bit leaves. He knew what a rotary saw leaves on granite versus sandstone versus basalt. He had documented hundreds of cut surfaces in his professional work and had a specific, technical vocabulary for what he was looking at. In 1977, he produced a privately circulated technical report, 32 pages with 19 photographic plates, titled simply, Anomalous Surface Striations in Southwestern Canyon Formations, a Preliminary Survey. In it, he documented 6 specific canyon formations, named, located by township and range, photographed from multiple angles in different light conditions to make the marks maximally visible, where the wall markings he observed were, in his professional assessment, inconsistent with any known erosive process and consistent with what he called rotary or oscillating mechanical contact at sustained pressure. He was careful in his language. He did not speculate about the source of the mechanical contact. He documented what he saw, described it in the technical vocabulary of his profession, and sent it to people with the credentials to evaluate it. He distributed the report to 11 geologists, 4 universities, and the United States Bureau of Mines. He received 3 responses. 2 were dismissals, both form letters. 1 from a geologist at the University of Nevada, whose name Whitfield redacted in the copy of the report he shared with a longtime colleague in Flagstaff, read in its entirety. "I know what you are describing. I have seen the same formations. I am not in a position to say anything further." Whitfield died in Tucson in 1981 at the age of 67. His home was cleared by his estate within 6 months of his death. None of his field notebooks, none of his photographic negatives, and no copy of the original 32-page report have been located by any subsequent researcher. Here is the connection the official record has never attempted to draw. The stumps of the great trees, the massive circular formations visible in pre-1880 photographs from Oregon, Washington, and Northern California, and in geological surveys from the Great Basin, share 2 features with the canyon walls that Whitfield and others have documented. First, the cut faces. When you examine the early photographs of the largest stumps, the ones with diameters of 40, 60, 80 feet, the top surfaces are flat, not broken, not splintered as a fallen tree would be, not decayed into a rounded mound as a naturally dying tree would leave. Flat, level, and in a number of photographs, marked with parallel striations running across the cut face in a consistent direction. Those striations are identical in their geometry to the striations on the canyon walls. Same interval, same depth-to-width ratio, same parallel alignment without deviation across a surface that, in the case of a large stump, might extend 30 feet in a single plane. Second, the geometry of the remaining formations. Several of the largest stump sites in the Pacific Northwest sit at elevations and on terrain profiles that, when mapped against the surrounding landscape, suggest the original structures they came from were not vertical like a standing tree, but integrated into the terrain at angles, connected, in some of the documented cases, to ridgelines, canyon rims, and the elevated edges of plateau formations. There is a school of thought within independent geological research, one that mainstream geology has not engaged with in any published forum, that what we call mesas and buttes and the elevated plateau remnants of the Colorado and Great Basin regions are not the resistant tops of eroded formations, but the cut bases of structures that were removed. The same instrument, the same signature, left in the stone beneath where the material was taken from, just as the sawed-off iron brackets in the courthouse cupolas left their mounting holes in the floor when everything above them was extracted. An independent researcher named Octavia Brennan, who had spent 11 years working as a botanical surveyor for the Forest Service, before leaving in 1969, following what she described only in a letter to her sister as a disagreement about what I was allowed to document in the field, compiled a private atlas between 1971 and 1983, cross-referencing stump site locations with canyon formation locations across the 11 western states. This was not casual work. Brennan had professional training in field mapping, geological survey reading, and botanical taxonomy. She spent those 12 years writing letters to county historical societies, state geological survey offices, and federal land management agencies requesting access to original survey photographs and field reports. She made 17 research trips to archive facilities in Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. The atlas she produced, hand-compiled with original photographs, annotated topographic overlays, and a 60-page analytical text, identified 47 cases in which a documented oversized stump site and a documented canyon with anomalous wall striations were located within 12 miles of each other, on compatible geological substrates and at elevations consistent with a single continuous formation prior to whatever event separated them. Her atlas was never published. In 1984, she deposited the original with the Special Collections Division of the University of Oregon Library. A 1989 catalog update lists the acquisition number as unresolved. The atlas does not appear in the library's current digital catalog. A reference librarian asked about the Brennan deposit in a 2011 letter from a researcher in Portland, responded that no record of the deposit could be located in the archive's physical intake log for the relevant period. Here is the pattern, stated without embellishment. Clatsop County, Oregon, 1881. Stump site photographed by federal timber surveyor showing flat-cut face with parallel surface striations, diameter estimated at 62 feet. Site has no accompanying record of the cutting operation. No equipment manifest. No labor record. No timber yield documentation. Iron County, Utah, 1903. Canyon formation photographed by a geological survey team showing repeating vertical striations on the eastern wall face at intervals of approximately 19 inches. Official survey report notes the striations and attributes them to undetermined erosive mechanism. No follow-up survey was conducted. Elko County, Nevada, 1911. A rancher named Thomas Garvey discovered a canyon formation on his property that had been exposed by a seasonal flood. He wrote to the Nevada state geologist describing the wall markings in specific terms: parallel, deep, consistent spacing, appearing on one wall only, not on the adjacent wall of the same canyon. The state geologist's office replied acknowledging receipt of his letter. No surveyor was sent. Garvey's original letter, which he retained a copy of, was passed to his grandson and was cited in a 1994 local history of Elko County, published by a small Nevada press. The letter itself has not been independently verified. Siskiyou County, California, 1897. A Forest Service timber assessor named Henry Doyle filed a report describing a stump site with a cut surface showing what he called tool signature, a phrase not used in standard timber documentation of the period. His report was received by the regional office in San Francisco. The section containing the phrase tool signature does not appear in the retained copy of the report filed in the National Archives. The retained copy is 3 pages. Doyle's original field report, which he logged as 5 pages in his submission record, has not been located. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The United States Forest Service has never adequately addressed why dozens of pre-1880 stump sites in the Pacific Northwest and the Great Basin have no accompanying cutting records despite federal timber law requiring documentation of all commercial harvesting operations from 1878 onward. It has never explained why the surface striations on those stumps match in their geometric profile, the wall markings in canyon formations located within a single landscape unit. It has never explained why the term tool signature appeared in a federal timber report in 1897 and was absent from the version of that report retained in the National Archives. Why did the General Land Office fail to open an investigation when a federal surveyor reported the theft of his field notebooks in 1888? Why does the Brennan Atlas acquisition number at the University of Oregon lead to an unresolved catalog entry that has remained unresolved for more than 30 years? Why do the canyon walls carry marks only on specific faces, not on adjacent surfaces exposed to the same weathering, the same water flow, the same geological pressure, unless the force that made them was directional, mechanical, and controlled? The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty what made the marks. What we know is this: parallel striations at consistent intervals on vertical stone surfaces are not produced by water. They are not produced by differential erosion. They are not produced by any natural mechanism that geology has documented in any peer-reviewed literature anywhere. What produces parallel striations at consistent intervals on a hard surface is a blade, a rotating surface, a cutting edge moving under controlled pressure across a resistant material. These are the marks of a machine. And the same interval, 19 inches, first recorded by Elias Cord Fenwick in a field notebook that no longer exists, appears in documented canyon formations in Arizona, Utah, and Nevada, and in the stump site photography from Oregon and Washington. The same interval. Across thousands of miles, on stone and on wood, whatever made those marks did not distinguish between the two. The official record tells us the canyons were carved by water, and the great trees were harvested by hand with axes and pit saws. What the wall marks tell us, what the stump photography tells us, and what the 47 cross-reference sites in Octavia Brennan's Lost Atlas tell us is that something else was here. Something that could hold a blade against vertical stone. Something that moved across a continent, leaving a consistent signature in every material it touched: stone, wood, and the 4 lines Elias Fenwick wrote at the rim of a slot canyon in Arizona in the summer of 1887, before his notebook disappeared and his career ended, and the question he had written down was left without an answer for 138 years. These records survive because people refuse to stop looking. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to see it. History does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. Next week, I am pulling the thread that connects the 19-inch interval to a set of patent filings made in Washington between 1872 and 1879. Filings that describe a class of cutting machinery with no commercial application that anyone at the patent office recorded, submitted by inventors whose names appear nowhere else in the industrial record of the period. 3 patents, 1 interval, and an assignee listed on all 3 that is not a company, not an individual, and not any institution the United States government has ever publicly acknowledged.